at the budget, there's no domestic debt. Treasury bills are a legitimate form of, treasury bills are supposed to act like an overdraft. Where there's a delay by the Treasury, by the KRA to submit enough money to government, the government should issue treasury bills to fill up the gap, but the treasury bills by law must be paid within 12 months. They cannot become a debt. Now, under the Public Finance Management Act, all borrowing must support a capital project, a development project which is defined. But you find that we are borrowing a lot of money on the domestic market without approval of Parliament. Where does this money go when it is not even budgeted for? Why are we borrowing this money? And it's running in billions of shillings. Madam Speaker, I wish our screens were working. I would have beamed my calculations onto that screen so that Kenyans can see how they are being scammed in the name of taking public debt. I've done a graph, and you'll realize one of the interesting things is that our debt spikes every time we have got a handshake, which means that the mechanisms of oversight are lost. In every year when you have had a handshake, there has been a spike in reckless borrowing and reckless expenditure by government. I hope it doesn't happen today. It's just unfortunate that we cannot, I don't know whether we are allowed or not, but I would have loved to be projecting some of these figures on these screens that we have here, so that all Kenyans can see exactly how we are being messed up, how we are being hurt. And another painful thing is that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which is all over demanding more powers and all that of you, has never audited our debt portfolio. I don't understand why they cannot just let the police, the economic crimes unit of the CID, do their work. The ESCC has never audited our debt. You find again, one of the things that has made our debt shoot up from 2014 is that Parliament amended the Public Finance Management Act to allow for money borrowed to be kept offshore, contrary to Article 206, which requires that all money borrowed must be kept in the consolidated fund. So they amended that, and at the discretion of the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, they can borrow money and keep offshore. And that's one of the things that is really affecting us. When you look at the total amount of debt that we have borrowed, many people discuss it in terms of the actual figures borrowed. But if you factor in, Madam Speaker, you factor in the cost of the loans, and you factor in the interest on the loans, you get a shocking figure. Right now, we are standing at 18 trillion shillings when you take those factors in. Totally unsustainable for us. And I think in the last payment I've seen in this statement, and the projections of paying 1.7 trillion, 2.7 trillion in debt and what have you, those kind of projections are not good for this country. They are existential threats to this country. You cannot have a budget of, say, 3.7 trillion and spend 1.7 trillion repaying debt, and only 700 billion of the 1.7 trillion goes to paying off the principal, and 1 trillion goes to paying interest. That cannot work. It's going to sink this country. Another issue, Madam Speaker, that I would like to speak to is another form of debt that is not necessarily public debt, but it's a debt to the public in the name of pending bills. Pending bills, Madam Speaker, are a major scam. And the scam masters have convinced everybody in this country that we abandon cash-based accounting, we go to accrual accounting. Arrant nonsense. How do you do that? When you implement a budget, and a budget is an act of parliament. A budget is a law, or a budget is an act of a county assembly. It's a law. How do you accrue from one law to another law without referring back to parliament? How do you carry a debt from year 1 to year 2 when year 1 parliament said, or the National County Assembly said, we are giving you this budget, we are giving you this power to collect funds, you should deal with that case. And you have been given the capacity to do an appropriation bill, an appropriation to a supplementary budget, where emergencies occur that you may not have foreseen. So this drive that we are going to go to accrual accounting, when governments are run on a cash basis, especially ours, and it's anchored in the Constitution, is another monster that is going to eat up this country. And we need to look it in the face and say, how do you achieve that? Because the people from this pack or whatever, these accountants, have come and they are hollering all over that that's what happens in the private sector. Who tells them that you can run a government like a private sector account? We implement budgets, which are laws. So I don't see a mechanism of accruing an issue from one budget to another budget without going back to parliament. I know that dispensations, there are countries which run on accrual basis. But it's not in their law. It's not in their constitution. A unique feature of Kenya's constitution that we have got chapter 12 on public finance, which tries to cure mischief that has happened in this country since independence, whereby public coffers have never been respected. That's why we have that purely technical chapter in our constitution prescribing what should be done. So when we move away from that and say, so and so does it, so and so does it, so and so the majority are doing it, but what is in their constitution? Is it like ours? Why did we put in our constitution? What are we trying to cure? So, Madam Speaker, I pray that this House, and I'm aware that this House even made some very grievous decision. It passed a motion saying that pending bills will be a first charge on the county revenue fund. And the logic, they said, okay, Article 14 of the 214 of the Constitution, Article 214 of the Constitution justifies or states that a public debt is a first charge on the consolidated fund. But they read 214 part 1. They did not read part 2, which then defines what is a public debt. Part 2 of 214 defines a public debt to be loans, guarantees for loans, and expenses incurred and related matters to loans. A pending bill where a county government has taken MCAs on a baseline study and they incur money and they can't pay, how does that become a public debt?